Hey, you're listening to the Centre podcast. We're a church based in Dural, Sydney, who love Jesus and so want to make him the centre of our lives, our community, and our world. We're going to learn how to do that right now as we sit down and unpack Sunday's sermon. All right, well, welcome back to Banter. My name's Murray.
And I'm Mitch.
And we are, starting our new series, our Lent series, looking at our first week on Jesus in the wilderness, the first thing that he did after his baptism in the Synoptic Gospels. And Mitch, thank you for the word on Sunday.
Oh, my pleasure.
It's the wilderness wandering, something which has really impacted a lot of church fraternities throughout history.
Yeah, definitely. I've mentioned it a few times just coming into Easter. From the 4th century, this is when the church sort of, had the official Lent calendar. Lent's just based off the Latin word 40. So Lent just means 40, essentially. And the church saw like Jesus' model of going into the wilderness for 40 days as a similar model for the church to abide by. Especially when Christianity became legal in Constantine's empire, the way to experience martyrdom wasn't so much getting sawn in two or thrown to lions or imprisoned. For the monks, it was about heading off into the wilderness. And, I'm trying to remember where I read it, but in church history, they talk about the highway, the deserts becoming like highways because there was so many like men and women heading out there on spiritual quests. Quite remarkable stuff. When I was on retreat last week, I just ducked off into the bush for an hour or so by myself, just be alone with the Lord. And even that, I'm like, the fact that Jesus was out in the wilderness for 40 days, kind of nicked off to the bush, maybe like half a K away into bushland, and had like ants crawling on me and stuff. And it's like, it just made Jesus' temptation so much more real. The fact that desert's very harsh and unforgiving place would not be recommended for someone to be wandering in the Judean wilderness without food for 40 days.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's something really fascinating that seems to be in the human psyche, even beyond religion, that humans sort of seek these wilderness experiences in, dare I say, mountaintop moments, whether or not you believe you're meeting Yahweh at the top of that mountain. I kind of think of, people going overseas and doing hikes and treks. I think of people even going to big music festivals, whether it's Coachella or Burning Man or, whatever the big day out is for young cool kids these days. I don't even know. Groove and the Moo, is that one even a thing? But whatever it might be, these ideas where there does still seem to be, even beyond Christianity, just in the human psyche, this real allure to seek a place in the wilderness, a place of isolation, a place of away from the normality of life. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I found it interesting, even people that aren't very spiritual crave silence. It was a while ago now, but SBS had a show which was just the point of, like, the first person point of view of, I think it was the Garn, just travelling through the Northern Territory. All these people are like, why do I find this so captivating? It's like, it's speaking to like a deeper need that people want silence and solitude and some sort of like simplicity that now those videos are really popular. You can but I remember that it was about 2017, I think. I remember like the time going, this is speaking into a cultural need of people's wanting to escape and find silence and solitude. What do you think is the rationale, as we dare to try and understand the mind of God, about drawing us into these wilderness places? To answer that, I have to go into a bit of biblical theology. So I think part of it is with the expulsion of the man and the woman from the garden, from that sacred space which was full of life, into the place of thorns and thistles and death and all that. I see it as a drawing into God as sustainer. When the I was going to say the Apostle Stephen, when Deacon Stephen was martyred, he part of his sermon is identifying those key moments when God appeared to Israel's ancestors outside of the temple. And a lot of them are in the wilderness: Abraham, tree, Moses, burning bush, etc. And I think that's part of it, like the wilderness, tapping into like the Hebrew idea of tahu, chaos, which is what the earth is like before it's created. The desert's a lifeless place, and it's in the lifeless place that the life-giving creator God meets people and sustains them. So I think there's a bit of that in there of like, well, Eden's been blocked off, but you can experience a taste of Eden in the wilderness by trusting in Jesus. And we see that like goes in like biblical times and I guess post-biblical times. Like Elijah, he's fed by the ravens. Like even Jesus feeding the 5,000 and the 4,000 in Mark's version. Right? Yeah, it's hard to comprehend that many people and just not having food. Like they've been waiting for 3 days. Like, where are you going to eat from? And that was the reality. If you went on a trek, like you just had to find what you could eat. So the fact that Jesus can provide food in the wilderness, I think it's part of it there. God encountering people in places where, you have to rely on Him as creator and sustainer.
Yeah, I couldn't help but think of the analogy of, the light shining brightest in the darkness, and this idea of the life of God, sort of just penetrating most notably and powerfully in these lifeless places of the wilderness. It's really striking. And I think, as you've already said, there's just, I think, a real desire for people to seek silence. And I think although we are probably in a time and a place where we are inundated more than ever with information and sound and stimulus, I think that the reality is, even first century Israel would have been a pretty crazy, bustling place in the middle of those cities, in the middle of the sprawling life of, marketplaces and as places of life would have probably been quite hectic at times and dirty and sensory overload. It is interesting that the places of silence, as you said, on the weekend, God speaking to Elijah in the whisper.
Not in this thunderstorm.
So as we kind of continue to look at this, there's obviously some interesting, I suppose, differences in Luke's account as opposed to Mark and Matthew. We definitely understand that Mark was written before Luke and probably Matthew was written before Luke. So is Luke just a poor copy and paster? Like, what's going on? Why has he retold this story of Jesus' wilderness experience notably differently?
So I came across one article in my readings which suggested that Luke's different orders is using a Jewish literary structure called a chiasm. And my Western brain struggles with chiasms. I'm not very good at spotting them, so I rely on others to detect them. Essentially, a chiasm is the center point of the story is the main point. This person suggested that by having the Satan bring Jesus to the mountain, that's the point, like the highlight of the story he's focusing on. And that's why there's a difference between the two, is that for us we're meant to take away that probably the biggest temptation that Jesus faced was to overcome the world without the cross. It was interesting as I read a number of people. Some people saw Satan as lying when it says, he showed him the king's world and he says, all this I'll give to you, if you worship me. So I'm like, Satan's just lying. He doesn't have that. And the New Testament's quite clear. Like, Satan is the prince of the power of the air, the prince of this world. And that's why it's important for us to recognize that like the Exodus temptation, the wilderness temptation is tapping into a stack of biblical imagery. And that's why it's so important to spend a lot of time on that, is that Luke's genealogy, finishing with the son of Adam, the son of Adam, the son of God, pointing to Jesus being the son of God to remind us of Adam's fall and the serpent, like Satan coming into the wilderness place, tempting with food, just like Adam and Eve. And that whole is a really interesting biblical, I guess, theme is food. Self-control around food is seen as really important. I'm trying to just find the reference. Here it is. Jacob Milgram. He's a Jewish scholar, I believe. It's in a journal article I found, The Biblical Diet Laws as Ethical System as an ethical system, food and faith. Like yes, for him that's where I found that whole idea of the first law was about not eating food. So I think that's really all these sort of images are playing into one, like a kaleidoscope. And so as we read it, we're meant to draw all these allusions to how we understand this temptation. It's not just a random account. Even the fact that Jesus is filled with the Spirit in Luke's version, which I guess he is in the other accounts too, but Luke's interesting as a gospel author. The side note, the Holy Spirit's introduced early on, like with Zechariah, Mary, and all that. And so Jesus here being filled with the Spirit, so it's God sending him in the wilderness deliberately to overcome Satan and conquer him and take back dominion of the world, so wrestle that back. And then it's interesting, as Jesus heads back into Galilee, he's still filled with the power of the Spirit. I think it's good to read these wilderness temptations alongside each other. Like Matthew's version, I like how it ends in Matthew's. Yeah, actually, the reason why I just chose Luke's version was because that's part of the lectionary. The lectionary chooses Luke for, so why not? But I like how Matthew's ends with the devil left him and the angels came and attended to him. So there's a sense there of like, just that, probably that thing that we don't really think about much is angels being God's ministers and ministering to us as people, and just that. And I quite like that idea. And even Mark's version, Mark is super short, one verse. That
classic Mark.
Yeah, I know. Keeping things, just a little summary. But actually, Richard Balcom in his book Living with Other Animals has a whole chapter on just these two verses, and his argument is that the wild animals, so tapping into like Old Testament images, especially around the scapegoat of the Day of Atonement, so Yom Kippur. So when so the high priest would sacrifice the bull to put the blood on the offering to offer the sanctification for sins and all that, and then he put his hand on the scapegoat and sent it out in the wilderness, and it was dedicated to Azazel, which is a bit like, what does this mean? It's like a goat demon or something. But point is, the wilderness came to represent, certainly by the Second Temple Judaism, like a place of demons. And so the fact that he's out there with wild animals, these are the uncontrollable animals, and Jesus is with them. He's doing what Adam and I guess Noah did to an extent, like controlling animals. And so, quite a fascinating read. So each of the authors has a different... All of them agree that it's in the wilderness for 40 days and tempted by Satan, but each has like a little different sort of angle for us to understand it better. But I think... And look, that author could be wrong, but that was probably the most convincing argument I found for the difference. That unless you get down the route of like, Luke was a terrible, like, collecting sources and stuffed it up, then it was a terrible... But which, you read Luke's gospel, he's very careful and methodical. And that, it's a chiastic structure, which is, the center point is the main point. So, as I said, I always struggle to chiasms. We do these exercises at college, and like, find the chiasm, I just, I can't find it. I have to have someone point it out for me. And I'm like, okay, now I can see it. Like, so the idea of a chiasm is meant to be like an A, B, C, then like B, A. Is that each step kind of mirrors.
And it highlights the C.
Though I think sometimes commentators like to shove in chiasms where they can. I'm like, I can't see a chiasm there.
Justify the publishing of their book, No, fair. So just to clarify, obviously Luke's gospel has this chiasm of the temptations, with this middle one being this temptation from Satan. So how does this differ? So Mark and Matthew have the temptations in a different order.
Yes. And
thereby the one that's in the middle in Luke then is really... What's that point that Luke is then making?
I think it's about... Like the author, I can't see his name here. I didn't write it down, which was silly. But the author is arguing that the idea being tying it into the like the genealogy. So the genealogy ends with the Son of God, Son of Adam stuff. Is that Jesus is now taking on the role of Adam, of taking over dominion over the whole world, and that's sort of. And I guess just that, and because Luke is the one who recounts Jesus like sweating blood in Gethsemane, and that's sort of another like garden temptation. Like we're meant to read into that, like the temptation of Adam in that. So, I think he's tying into those images of, and I love that about Jesus. He's like, I don't want to do this. Take this cup away, but not my will, but yours be done. And so, that temptation was there from the start, really, of like, well, I could just worship Satan and just don't have to go through this.
Yeah. So while Matthew's gospel, for instance, is really trying to highlight that Jesus is a new Moses and a new David a lot of the time, Luke's gospel is really trying to highlight one of the big themes is that he's a new Adam.
Yeah.
So thereby having that as the middle temptation, it's really highlighting this idea to an intended Gentile audience as well, which is really fascinating. And then so in that, it does raise the question that obviously Luke chose to slightly rearrange the retellings of Matthew and Mark. Church tradition and most sort of scholars tend to agree that Mark chronologically was the first gospel of the four written, and then those sort of accounts that Mark has compiled are as again tradition suggests from Simon Peter. So are we suggesting at some point Jesus went out into the wilderness by himself and then came back, at some point told Simon Peter about this experience? Peter then told that to Mark or shared those in sermons, and then Mark sort of, so how is this kind of working? Because I think a lot of the time when we're reading the Gospels, there's other people who are witnessing it. So what's the sort of almost literary journey of this story? And then also how literally are we supposed to take it? Is Jesus kind of sharing this parabolic journey that he was taking? Is there sort of metaphor and analogy in that? How are we supposed to take this as a solo moment? It's because it's not the same as like the Transfiguration where there were actual witnesses.
Well, if I'm not a scholar, but if I was a scholar, I would argue that the gospel authors are using the Q source. And Q, I found out, just like the German word means source. So thanks, Peter Robbo, for that, if you're listening in. I'd argue it's around like that Q source idea. And Q, if people don't remember, was sort of the traditions that Jesus and the apostles had, like the teachings around him. My suggestion, I don't need to look into this. My suggestion would be is that Jesus spoke a lot to the apostles, and there's nothing outside the realm of, not to think that he would have just told them about these experiences that he went through. Because 40 days comes up again after Jesus' resurrection. Like he spends 40 days teaching. Like, man, what was that happening that teaching? I'd love to know what was going on there. And I guess that's kind of part of it. The resurrection, I guess, is the hermeneutic for interpretation, and particularly in Mark's account, it's really prevalent, this idea of the messianic secret, that you can kind of get halfway through the book, and then when Jesus reveals about what he's going to do, he starts to be a lot more, I guess, open within the book. And so, and even like the apostles, it seems to be the overwhelming theme is that we don't really understand what you're saying, Jesus, but then when you're resurrected, it all makes sense. Like that's and John makes that really clear. He's probably the most like clear when Jesus cleanses the temple. It's like, destroy this temple, in 3 days I'll raise it up. And people are like, well, it took 46 years to build this. What are you talking about? It's like, after his resurrection, they understood it. So that would be my suspicion, is that Jesus probably just told him. He spent a lot of time with him. I spent 2 days on retreat and ended up talking to people for like 2 hours at night. You spend 3 years with someone, there's a lot of chance to chat. So that would be, my suspicion. That's what I would suspect, he just told him. In terms of the journey, I could allude to this. There was St. Anthony. He was a early monk who, cut a long story short, he was very wealthy, heard the story of the rich young ruler, got very convicted by it, came to faith, and so he gave himself up as a monk and dedicated his life. And so Athanasius, who was one of the, I guess, he really significant in the life of the 4th century church. He helped set up, like, I guess, what we call the doctrine of the Trinity and set up the creeds that we worship. He wrote a biography about Anthony, and so I've got here a quote, and you can get this book. It's called Early Church Lives. It was a bestseller at that point in time, and so this is when Anthony first came to faith. So Anthony was known for wrestling with demons. It said, first he, this is the Satan/demons, tried to unsell him at night by means of hostile hordes and terrifying sounds, and then he attacked him by day with weapons that were so obviously his that no one could doubt that this was against the devil that Anthony was fighting. For the devil tried to implant dirty thoughts by Anthony, pushed them away by means of constant prayer. The devil tried to titillate his senses by means of natural carnal desires, but Anthony defended his body by faith, by praying at night and by fasting. At night the devil would turn himself into the attractive form of a beautiful woman, omitting no detail that might provoke lascivious, they say it, thoughts, but Anthony called to mind the fiery punishment of hell and the torment inflicted by wombs. In this way he resisted the onslaught of lust. The devil, without hesitation, set before him the slippery path of youth that leads to disaster, but Anthony concentrated on the everlasting torments of future judgment and kept his soul's purity untainted throughout these temptations. And it goes on. Eventually Anthony goes and lives in a cave, and it got to the point where like people would come and like almost like once a year and just drop off food, throw it in. And as you read, there's like stories of like almost like wild animals and horrific sounds just coming out of this cave. And then you go in, like the monks couldn't see anything, and so I reading scripture, and it's depicted like traditionally in like artworks is that Satan appeared in some sort of form. What that form looked like, I don't know. And I like the cover of this is the Penguins Classics. It's got St. Athanasius, and there's a little red devil like trying to whack him. It's a great feature, and I don't know what demons look like. I've never actually seen a demon, but I do think that Satan appeared to Jesus in some form, whether it was in his kind of angel of light, which the Apostle Paul describes him, in his beauty. I don't know, maybe he was a red-deviled horn. There's a reason, I guess, why the church drew demons that way. Maybe. Anyway, so I think especially like Jesus' temptation, the example is mirrored throughout church history of these monks being like assailed by demons and Satan and having like physical appearances. When Rach and I were in Laos, one of the Christians there told us when they went into this village, an old man appeared. It wasn't an old man, it was a demon. Came to the house that they were in and says, "What are you doing in my village? Get out." So, like, that stuff happens all the time. Just doesn't happen here in the West. So, so that's kind of my long-winded answers to both those questions. It's probably most likely Jesus just told the disciples these stories. And, that this was like a real temptation that Jesus experienced. And, Satan was likely there in some sort of bodily form, whatever that looked like. But that was there.
When we talk about the sort of appearance of, apparition of Satan, it is kind of interesting because I personally think that we almost miss a bit of the point when like Satan is portrayed as ugly.
Yes.
Because so there's this really interesting story of this guy. I just kind of looked it up. It was back in the 1900s, 1842. Joseph Geefs carved the Angel of Evil, this statue that you could look up, to be placed in the pulpit of Liège Cathedral, but the statue was removed because of its distracting allure and unhealthy beauty. Like, ultimately, the priests were like, this guy's too good looking. Like, we can't have this sort of, like, sexy Satan statue in our cathedral. Like, it's going to be distracting. Yeah. So then they got his older brother to make another statue, and it was probably more sensuous. But the idea, actually of, like, Satan being this alluring, attractive, thing, I think is actually both more faithful, description that the Bible offers. And I think also when you depict him as this red, sort of pitchforked, goateed, dude, you kind of miss this fact that Satan can be very attractive and alluring. He sort of, tricks people. And he is like a fallen angel. I think angels, as we understand, tend to be these luminous, sort of striking things of beauty that God has created. I don't know. I just think theologically we miss something really rich and profound when we think of the physicalization of Satan as this really ugly thing, because the reality is like the temptation is that it is appealing.
Yes. And that's probably why the church depicted demons as like ugly to represent like what their underlying
The
nature
inside.
is. The
Yes.
inside is, but yeah, definitely. Like, well, with Anthony there, like Satan appeared to him as a beautiful woman.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
the idea is like,
Yeah.
it's like, hey,
Yeah.
have this.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah. So a lot of this sort of story can't help but sort of bring up questions around temptation. And the obvious answer is, Jesus recited scripture that, as is, so often quoted when Paul writes in Ephesians about the spiritual armor. I think in Ephesians 6, really the only weaponry is the word of the Spirit, that everything else is a protective armor, and the only sort of weapon we have really is the word and the Spirit. But you kind of asked in the study questions, what techniques have you used to overcome temptation? And I think techniques and tools are two different things.
Yeah.
So we're not saying that these things supersede the Word of God and the Holy Spirit. But yeah, I think an interesting and helpful conversation for us to have. What sort of strategies and techniques do you see as helpful in our daily lives as we are walking through the wilderness of life to overcome
Well, I guess the
temptation?
simple ones, like quoting from Evagris, is like that memorization of scripture.
Yeah.
And so I mentioned it like on Sunday, part of like the 8 sort of, he would call them demons that speaks. So you got a demon of lust, a demon of gluttony, a demon of like sadness and all that. And what he did was he compiled, I don't know if it was every thought that he had experienced in this or others, but yeah, it was like different thoughts that run through. And so perhaps with, I don't know, let's take gluttony as an example.
Sure.
Like it's a very broad category.
Yeah.
And so recognizing that it's not just, yes, it's gluttony, this is a verse, but like there could be hundreds of different ways you're tempted to act out gluttony. And here is a routine. Here's a way to help overcome that.
Yeah.
And memorizing that. So look, that's one simple way. I guess I'll say the spiritual one first and the not so spiritual one first.
No.
Like obvious ones, obviously, reciting scripture, being able to quote it, talking back, prayer. Actually, one big one that Saint Benedict had was actually keeping busy. And that was a big thing that he had for monks, was there was a balance of work and rest. And he recognized very early on that idleness in monks leads to a lot of temptation. And it's, I guess, one of the, when especially professional sports athletes, once upon a time, so my mum's father, my pop, he played for the Parramatta 2 Blues, which if anyone knows rugby, I don't even know if they exist anymore, the club.
Yeah.
But anyway, like the equivalent of like first grade in rugby. But he worked in the bank and would train after work.
Yeah.
It wasn't that. And so once athletes were paid just to play sport, there's a lot of downtime, which causes trouble. And you see what happens. They get drunk, they do things. And so, there's actually like a real justification, and God set up a week this way, 6 plus 1 day off, is that actually keeping busy is a way to so that's part of it. Like if you struggle with lust or something like that, keeping yourself busy at night is a way to overcome that. And Jocko Willink talks about discipline is freedom. Like actually having discipline and routine is a way to overcome that. What we're calling an anchor, but just traditionally an accountability partner, is part of that, is having someone that you know, someone in the journey. Apostle Peter talks about Satan being like a roaring lion, seeks to devour. And overcome a fearsome enemy. It's a lot better to have, 2 are better than 1. And so, that's just part of it. And I guess too, the classic David and Bathsheba situation with that, David wasn't in the space he was meant to be. Like, don't stick your hand in the fire, so to speak, just to test it, because you're going to get burnt. And so, they are some of the ways of doing it. So, and you got to kind of do what works for you best. But it's not. But I would just say all those things are important. Like it's not just like just talk back to, like that's part of it. Sure, talk back. Have accountability. Have that memorization of scripture. Have a routine. Like if because part of the Lenten challenges in week 3 is limiting screen time to only like necessary. Like if that's something that you find yourself doing, which which Evagrius would call like, vainglory or sadness, or just wasting time, just wasting time. If you find you're sitting there like spending 3 hours unproductively, like, well, okay, if there's a problem at night, then find some way to like do something different, like set up structures in your life. It's a combination of all. And this is what I think is really helpful about some of like standing on the shoulders of giants, is you recognize, there really is nothing new under the sun. Like, Evagrius gave us like a manual that's like 1700 years old for helping to overcome this. And we're still kind of using the same principles today.
I love that one of just being aware of patterns. I think that's a really helpful one for temptations, which may have even become addictions or repeated patterns of unhealthy behavior. Just kind of even that examen exercise of just reflecting, okay, cool, that's what I ended up doing. I ended up giving into that temptation again. Where was I? What time was it? Who was I around? What was I feeling? Like just asking some of those questions so that next time you're in that position, you can almost flag it before it happens. You go, ooh, like I'm in this space again and it's this time and I'm feeling this way, or maybe I'm around these people. Like, Satan is crouching ready to pounce, I think that can be really helpful. And the examen exercise and just some, self-reflection can be really, really helpful in that. So I think that's really cool. And then in all this, I guess there is sort of the question as well of, with the people that we're kind of, journeying with, that kind of coming together is really important. But I'd love to kind of have a bit of an open chat for a moment just with you about, how your week's been going, what you've kind of been finding difficult, what you've been finding easy, and how you've been going with this challenge so far.
So difficult. This week has been a bit unusual because the Mance's bathroom is leaking, so we've had to do a full reno. So it's been a bit higgledy-piggledy. So it wasn't an ideal way to start the week with builders being here and the house being all upside down. But that's also part of life. And recognizing that, and I said this to a few people, is that life just doesn't work in its simple. Like in a perfect world, you could get up early, do your spiritual disciplines, and day set. But it doesn't also work that way. And so, that's kind of been part of it, is like a disrupted week in that. And so actually, trying to find the time to do that around this disruption has been the challenge, but also the blessing. Of like, I'm still can find time to do that. So, so I would say this week, it's been disruptive, but also helpful. Is that so? This morning, for instance, didn't get, like, I wanted to have a longer time, like to do it in a block, but just didn't get that. It's like, okay, like it's kind of got to do what you got to do. Like when you got 2 kids that are up at like 5. Unless I start getting up at 3 or 4, like it's really hard. So and that's just part of life. And so I was only able to do like half of the prayer I wanted to do. It's like, okay, and then I did some more later. Like and so that's how I find the challenges. But again, that's life, and recognizing that part of this 6 weeks challenge is that it's about forming good habits. And so it's not necessarily about, if you miss a day or something gets disrupted, like this morning, it's not like you get struck with lightning. It's about, overall, I'm developing habits that lead to this, that I'm going to do either this in the mornings or this in the middle of the day or this at night. And so still going through that. I guess I kind of mentioned it a bit on Sunday, because I said a bit hypocritical for me. So I've been sort of doing this stuff on my own for the last couple of months now, and have using a few different tools which I've found helpful, but being flexible in those tools. And so I've discovered another Lectio app, and this one's a little, what's the Lectio app? I think it's just called Lectio, this app. And so I used to use Lectio 365, and that's really good, and I recommend it to people, but I actually found the devotion really annoying. That's just me. No criticism of like the content they produce, but I like just hearing scripture. And so this app is just Lectio, and it you can actually dictate the amount of time you spend. So, and it has 6 steps. So it has like a time of silence, the time, and you just do one reading of Lectio, then you do the meditate, then you do the prayer, then you sit quietly in contemplation, and then you journal. And so some days you can make all those 6 steps go for 10 minutes each, make it an hour, you could make it go for 6 minutes.
Yeah.
And so depending on and so that's probably one of the things that, in doing this is actually having the flexibility and go, oh, today, I've got time for this. I'm going to spend half an hour. Oh man, I've only got 10 minutes. Let's make it 10 minutes. And so, something is better than nothing.
Yeah.
And it's similar to physical exercise is 10 minutes of physical exercise is better than 0 minutes. So if all you can do is 10 minutes, that's better. And it's similar with spiritual disciplines. If life's really busy right now and all you can carve out, I've got 10 minutes downtime. So for me, that's part of being where I'm at is in funny enough, enjoying the disruption, because it's actually making the challenges. The rubber's hitting the road because the ducks haven't lined up as I would have liked, but that's life. And so and that's, I think, especially as a pastor, I told someone we're paid to pray. Others, they're not paid to pray, so to speak. And so kind of feeling a bit like, for lack of a better word, I guess a normal person that's not in ministry. Disruption this week. So
yeah, absolutely.
How about yourself?
Look, to be honest, for me, I definitely struggle with a lot of temptations, but unnecessary purchases aren't usually one of them. So I've just decided to do cold showers as well this week, which has been refreshing and exhilarating. Yeah, look, I think for me, the cold showers have been really good. Have been definitely, you kind of can't help but I don't know, when you're doing it as an intentional spiritual practice, you can't help but just be okay, God, I'm here right now and I'm awake. I kind of almost feel like a cold shower is a bit of a shofar. It's like a blast that wakes you up spiritually a bit if you're choosing it to frame it that way, which is kind of cool. I think also maybe recognizing that I think having that sort of I guess that blast, that spiritual wake up in that way to start the day. And maybe I can be a bit meandering in the morning getting ready, and I think that sort of cold shower is boom, all right, let's get into it, let's be focused. I think for me, I struggle with journaling. I think I struggle with journaling because my sort of first career path that I unsuccessfully pursued was script writing, so very much writing was work. And then likewise, even in pastoring, there's a lot of writing, so it's hard for me to maybe I don't know, just enjoy it as a spiritual practice. I know that you don't do spiritual practices purely to enjoy it, but it really does just feel like work a lot of the time to me. So I haven't been very faithful in journaling. I feel like when I journal because I feel called to, I find it really edifying. And when I journal because I have to, I'm just in a really crappy mood. I'm just I don't even know, just talking about this. So that's my confession. I find journaling really helpful when I can do it in my own sort of impulse and feeling called to, and as a daily practice I find it very challenging, so I haven't been great with the journaling. But look, I think that it is one of those things as well where just kind of, as you even said at the beginning, I found it really striking that Lent was something that Christians and sort of monks even took on in a period where there was less persecution. I found that really striking, that there is something about, sort of beating your flesh, in Paul's words.
I think too, it's not about, I think the monks did go a bit overboard. But I think too, we have probably swung too much into Christian hedonism. And I've been doing cold showers now. This will be my second year actually doing it, and I still find it tough. Doesn't get any easier. I'm sorry, my friend.
No, that's all right.
No, you can't kind of but even just that, I was saying to someone, I was God doesn't kind of love you more by having a cold shower.
Oh, okay, I might stop then.
Sorry, man. but it is an element of I'm just giving up something comfortable. For something. Little act of sort of self-denial. Which can help with greater acts, and all of us struggle. I'm a bit unnecessary purchases aren't really a big.
It's probably easy when we get free barista-made coffee at work.
It is a bit, yeah.
It's like, that is really probably the only...
What will be hard is when we have to give up our favourite drink for a week.
Yes.
That will be a tough week.
Yeah, that bottle of vodka you drink every day, just giving them that.
The coffee will be bad. I'll have a crippling headache.
Yeah.
I did give it up, actually. I did a week. I remember that's January I did it, yeah. By day 2, like, I actually had to go to bed early. Yeah. I said to Rachel, I have such a bad headache.
Yeah.
Like, it's actually like...
Yeah.
I went to bed. I actually woke up okay. And then I was fine for the rest, but the first couple of days were, like, awful.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm not looking forward to that again. I'm like, ugh. But, yeah, that's sort of part and parcel of it. Each of us have vices. But even with the unnecessary purchases, Rachel and I were chatting about it on Sunday of just, like, it's a way to just help, think about like generosity. And like I said, this week's been tough because the Renault, so everything's been about, I need to purchase this, we need to purchase that, and it's like, what a terrible week to start. But yeah, and I don't know, like you said, but also too, I like what you've done. It's like, this isn't really an issue of mine, I'm going to do something different. And that's kind of the point. They're gimmicks. Each kind of fast a bit of a gimmick, for lack of a better word. It's like, like if you're hardcore, and some people are, you give up all these things in one go. Yeah. And I actually think that can be very counterproductive. Yeah. I was talking to someone at church, and they're like, it seemed really easy. And I was super gung-ho, then realised, actually, this is really hard. And I'm like, it's kind of why just doing one thing at a time is a lot more helpful. It's a bit like education. Like, you build the blocks up of knowledge rather than, here's how you learn calculus in one sitting. You're like, you build up knowledge, and it's a lot easier to... And that's the idea here is that in years to come, perhaps it's like, for this, give up more and more things as a way, because you're like, I did that, and I feel being stretched more. And so it's a weird thing. It's I guess that's the tension with Christianity, is that, and it's a great tension, is that Jesus ate bread. He had lots of it. Yeah. In fact, someone wrote somewhere, what I read, that Jesus feasted his way through the kingdom. I'm like, that's pretty accurate, actually. Like, there's a lot of times, a lot of encounters of Jesus, like, feasting, but also he knew when to fast. And I think that's the important thing, is that in that context, in the 40 days, eating would have been sinful. But in another context, it's like fine and legitimate. And so, and that's where, these things are the giving up of things that... Because someone said the problem with Lent, a lot of people, I'm just going to give it chocolate. And it's like, cool. Like, okay, that's a good thing. But also, like, you're giving up something bad. Like, it's actually, like, the kind of the purpose of it is you're giving up something good to rely on God more. Not like, we probably shouldn't be getting chocolate anyway. So, whereas, giving up a warm shower, like, it's an element of comfort that God has blessed us with as a way. A bit of self-denial, a bit of like, learning to pick up the cross. And so it excites me. So, but like I said, I've been doing it for 2 years now, so it's not as, maybe I have to put an ice bath.
I mean, look, maybe I'm just getting some sort of like honeymoon phase, but I have felt after the first few days that it has gotten a bit easier. I'm not going to say it's easy.
It does really.
I think the first few days was like brutal.
It's
and then I'm like, okay, I feel like my body almost like knows what to expect now.
Yeah,
I'm like, okay.
For me, it's the part for I still find the worst. And it's only for about 5 seconds is when like the water goes down the back. Yeah, you're like, yeah. And then after that, you're sort of like, you're good. So
I sort of, my technique is I let it just run over my head first. I sort of like lean my head in, and then once my head's cooled down, then I like do you're totally right. The torso is the worst.
Yeah, but just something about that for the first few seconds is just terrible. But then and then it becomes, and then you just get used to it. Yeah. In fact, Rachel, she's like, most people like would throw cold water or someone having a show. She goes, should I throw hot water on you as a way to punish you?
Get you out of the shower.
I'll have jumped in the shower after her. She left it running. Like, it's so hot, burning. I'm not used to this. Yes. It's just a normal temperature.
Although I feel like from my anecdotal experience, women can tend to deal with hotter showers than men for some reason. Anyway,
scolding and they're like, it's just a nice temperature.
Obviously, just tougher than men. Yeah. Well, we're heading on to next part of our Lent series this Sunday, and I'm kind of leading us through through, Mark 8, which comes at a really interesting time. You kind of alluded to today, just after Jesus somewhat reveals himself to his disciples as the Messiah. Peter sort of says, "You're the Messiah." And, Jesus says, "Well done." And then the next second says, "Get behind me, Satan." Peter's not super keen for what that definition of Jesus's version of the Messiah might look like, of taking up your cross and dying. So it's the way of the cross is sort of the big overarching theme, and what it looks like to actually follow in the footsteps of Jesus is the big challenge. So again, there's self-denial, just indelibly etched and inwoven in that idea of what it means to follow Jesus, all the way to taking up your cross and even giving up your own life. So challenging passage.
Yeah, not exactly something that, say, Tim Tebow would put under his eyebrows, John 3:16, put Mark 8.
Yeah.
Pick up your cross and follow me.
No, not exactly the most inspirational sermon this Sunday, but hopefully one which does have some hope in it, because I think that one thing that I've been noticing in it is that the journey of following Jesus doesn't actually end on a cross.
No, it doesn't.
It ends in resurrection.
Yeah.
And that is ultimately the hope that we have in following that way. Not to become these sort of, ascetic, sort of almost, masochistic Christians that enjoy pain for the sake of it. But ultimately we understand that we walk through the darkest valleys so we can enter into the tree of life and inherit that resurrection life. So hopefully something which is challenging but also has some light at the end of the tunnel.
100%. And I quoted from Fulton Sheen on Sunday is that after fasting comes feasting. And tapping into that idea of, well, like Jesus said to the disciples, like, whoever gives up their wives, brothers, sisters, all that, you get 100-fold in the kingdom when it's arrival. And you're like, okay, a bit of suffering now for greater rewards later. Yeah.
Well, continuing to pray for all of you guys as you likewise journey with us on this technically 42-day, but 40-day challenge.
It's a symbolic 40.
That's it.
It's a symbolic 40. We're doing a biblical sort of thing.
No, it's good. It's good. I honestly, my OCD would have absolutely snapped if it had finished on a Friday. Got to go all the way through or finish on Thursday. Would have been even worse. Well, Mitch, as always, thank you for the chat.
Thank you, everyone. See you later.
See you Sunday. Thanks so much for joining us. Don't forget to rate and subscribe to help others discover this channel. Check out the description if you want to find out more or get in touch with us at the Centre Dural. But in the meantime, praying for God's hand over you as you continue to step into everything Jesus has in store for your life. Be blessed.